Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Found Love in Many Hearts, Shizune, Tsunade, Mei, Kurenai, and Koyuki, Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto spun around and was quickly on guard, however what he saw caused him to widen his eyes. Fireworks were exploding, causing a mixture of beautiful colors. Flashback. Ka-chan, a 4-year-old Naruto said as he ran towards his mother, dodging through the people of Konoha. Kushina Uzumaki turned on her heels at the sound of her baby boy and smiled, putting her hands on her stomach. Her small bump was clear enough to show everyone she was pregnant. Naru-chan, Kushina said, smiling as she spread her arms out. Immediately Naruto crashed into Kushina, being careful not to cause too much impact on his mother's pregnant belly. Kushina fondly ruffled Naruto's hair as her son hugged her, and seeing him in his dark blue kimono made her heart melt. Naru-chan, if you're here, where's your father? Kushina asked, looking around for Minato. He's here, Minato said, dropping from a rooftop in a kimono matching with Naruto. To-chan, Naruto happily said as he watched his father grin at him. Naruto, what's that over there? Minato said, pointing behind Naruto. Immediately the young blonde turned around in excitement to see what his father was pointing at. However, the moment he turned he found himself screaming as his father had picked him up and put him on his shoulders. Ka-chan, Naruto whined, causing Kushina to laugh. Naru-chan, remember your father is as much of a big kid as you are, Kushina said, walking beside Minato while still giggling at Naruto's pouting face. However, Naruto started to smile as he and his parents walked around Konoha celebrating the end of the Third Shinobi War. Boom! Naruto's eyes widened when he saw the beautiful lights the fireworks emitted and stared open-mouthed in awe at the shapes they made. They're beautiful, aren't they, Naru-chan? Kushina said, smiling towards Naruto as she saw his glazed-over expression. Yeah, Naruto said in awe as he continued to watch the explosion of colors. In a way, we're all like fireworks. All our lives we aspire to reach as high as we can and in the end go off in an explosion, Minato said, sagely, missing Naruto's horrified expression. Explosion? Naruto stuttered in fear as he looked towards his mother. Minato! Kushina shouted, causing the blonde-haired Hokage to scratch his head sheepishly. Well, not literally explode unless, a warning glance from Kushina told him everything, but one day you will understand, Minato finished smiling. Naruto slowly nodded and looked back up to the fireworks in amazement. End of flashback. Naruto, the voice of Tsunade snapped him back into reality. Blinking a few times, Naruto studied his surroundings before sighing. I think I'm going to call it an early night, Naruto said in a dead voice. Huh? Tsunade raised her eyebrows before watching Naruto walk away. Where's Naruto-kun going, Tsunade-sama? Shizune asked as she joined her master and watched Naruto walk away, his steps dead and lifeless. He'll be alright, just give him some time, he's not used to being around such lively events. They probably brought back memories, Tsunade said, sadly pulling Shizune with her as they tried to enjoy the rest of the festival. For what seemed the 100th time, Naruto dropped onto the bed in his room and sighed. Memories of his parents were constantly popping up, no matter how hard he tried to suppress them, from moments his father had won him his first prize, to eating with his parents happily as a family. Naruto ran a hand through his hair and grunted as he tried to ignore the noises coming from outside, hoping that if he couldn't hear anything he wouldn't remember anything. Eventually the noise did die down a little. The celebration seemed to move, so people were off the street and into bars. Naruto, however, bolted up as soon as he heard someone knocking on his door. Quickly grabbing a kunai, Naruto moved towards the door and opened it slightly. He sighed when he saw the blonde hair of Tsunade standing at his door impatiently. What are you doing here, Tsunade? Naruto asked, raising an eyebrow. Let me in first, then I'll tell you, Tsunade said. Naruto shrugged and opened the door fully and walked back towards his bed while Tsunade followed and closed the door. So, what is you wanted? Naruto asked again as he sat down on the bed. I wanted to talk to you, Tsunade stated, pulling out a chair and placed it next to the bed before sitting on it. What is it you wanted to know? Naruto looked towards Tsunade, his eyes emotionless. I want to know what was eating at you when you looked at the fireworks, Tsunade said bluntly and narrowed her eyes when she saw Naruto just sigh and lay down on the bed. What's eating at me, you say? Well, if I were to tell you what was eating at me, we'd be here forever. However, I'm not naive enough to think that you don't know what's wrong with me either, since your suffering is similar to mine, Naruto said, watching as Tsunade's eyes widened. Tsunade was speechless as she looked at Naruto, his blue lifeless eyes. They were eyes of someone who had seen death, the eyes she had only ever seen in the most veteran of shinobi, the ones who that had lost everything. I know why you're here, though. Due to the connection you have with my parents and sensei, you think I'll just open up. However, I'm not so easy to read. I need to be like that. I have to be, Naruto said, looking sorrow for a moment. Tsunade stared at Naruto sadly, her brown eyes softening slightly as she saw the results of growing up too fast. Huffing, Tsunade closed her eyes. You saw it, didn't you? You saw your parents die, right? Tsunade said and sighed when she seen his expression not change. It was clear to her now that he trusted no one truthfully. We talk about death so easily when we don't see it, but when you witness the death of someone you love and you know that there isn't any way that you can prevent it, something just snaps, Tsunade spoke softly. Naruto looked into Tsunade's eyes. She was starting to open up. He did wonder why she was opening up slightly to him, but for now he just stayed quiet and let her talk. I've only been truly affected by death twice. I'm a medic, so I'm used to seeing death. However, when I had to watch the man I love die and not be able to help him, it killed me inside. The other death was my brother Naoki. When I was called in to see his body, I was devastated. My little brother, someone I watched grow, was dead, barely recognizable. Tsunade continued and rubbed her hand against her cheek and gasped slightly when she saw it was tears she had wiped away. When was the last time she had cried, she wondered. Naruto stared sadly as he saw Tsunade pouring her heart even if she didn't know it, and by the way she was gripping the green stone necklace he could tell she was struggling to keep it together. My father. Naruto started, causing Tsunade to look up towards him, her once hardened eyes now turned into liquid. Once told me we are all like fireworks, we rise as high as we can and then end in an explosion. Naruto smiled slightly as he said it. At the time I never knew what he meant. However, I think I do now. He meant we rise as high as we can, searching for our dreams and try to make them possible, and once we get as far as we can, we die. But when I think about my father's death, I don't understand it. Was that as high as he could reach? Naruto shook his head, trying to stray away slightly. Anyway, I usually try to stay away from festivals and large party events because then I can forget all the times I spent with my mother and father. But the more I try to forget, the more I remember. But there's one image that won't go away. I see it every time I close my eyes. I see them dying. Why won't it go away? Naruto said, now with his hand grasping his head as if he was trying to force the memory out. Tsunade looked down a little as she watched Naruto break down. Even if it was a little, she could see how badly his parents' death had affected him. She could also understand on a level she too sometimes saw the faces of Dan and Naoki every time she closed her eyes. I don't know how to stop them. Believe me, I've tried. The only time I stop seeing them is when I'm too drunk to remember, Tsunade muttered. Naruto raised an eyebrow slightly when he heard Tsunade. I'm also sick and tired of people telling me to move on, get past your depression, come back to the village, especially Jiraiya and Sensei, she continued sourly. They say those things because they think it will help, though usually it hurts more since we are unable to get past it. Usually I would try help you, but since I'm in no position to offer advice, so anything I suggested would be useless to both you and I, though I do believe eventually we do find that one person we believe in that will help us find our path, Naruto said, sitting up and looking at Tsunade. Why you do? Tsunade stuttered, looking at Naruto. Yeah, I do. One day you will find someone to believe in again, Naruto said, moving some off Tsunade's hair behind her ear and placing his hand on her cheek, to which she closed her eyes and leaned into his hand. I'm just so lonely, no one understands, Tsunade said quietly with tears running down her eyes while enjoying the feeling of Naruto's hand on her face. I know, I am too, Naruto said, pulling Tsunade into a hug, to which surprisingly she never pushed him back and was even more surprised when he felt her wrap her arms around his waist. Naruto stayed there for 15 minutes listening to Tsunade cry out all her frustrations. I bet this wasn't the way you were expecting to spend your birthday, huh? Tsunade said into Naruto's chest, sniffling slightly. Well, it's not the worst birthday I've had, Naruto said, lifting Tsunade's head up by taking her chin in his hand. I mean, Shizune and you have made me laugh and even gone out of your way to make me happy, and for that thank you. Naruto finished placing a kiss on Tsunade's forehead. However, when he pulled back he noticed Tsunade staring at him intently, and slowly both their heads leaned into each other and landed their lips on one another. Warning: skip if you don't want to read. Tsunade s her arms around Naruto's neck as they continued their passionate lip lock. Their tongues wrestled each other, fighting for dominance as they both desperately tried to taste one another's mouth. Gaining the advantage, Tsunade pushed Naruto onto the bed fully and straddled his waist while looking down with a small blush. That was amazing, Naruto said, reaching his hand up and stroking Tsunade's face. Tsunade smiled and closed her eyes at the feeling of Naruto's hand. They were so soft and warm. Opening her eyes, Tsunade cupped Naruto's face and drew him into another passionate kiss. For numerous minutes both Naruto and Tsunade laid there kissing one another, desperately holding onto each other for comfort. Tsunade pulled back slightly and let her forehead rest on Naruto's while their mouths were still connected by a line of saliva. That felt wrong, Tsunade said as she bit back when she felt Naruto hardness prod her. Yeah, but it felt so good, Naruto stated as he stared into Tsunade's hazel eyes. Yeah, it did, Tsunade replied as she gave Naruto a lingering peck on the lips while she tugged on his top. Getting the hint, Naruto pushed Tsunade back a little so he could sit up and lifted his top off and threw it away, letting Tsunade get a good look at his body. You have a great body, Naruto, Tsunade said, pushing him back down and raking her fingers over his chest before leaning down and placed kisses all over his chest. Slowly she lowered her kisses until she reached his pants and shot Naruto a smirk. These pants have to go, Tsunade said, unzipping them and pulling them down before throwing them away, leaving Naruto in only a pair of his boxer shorts. Oh, you're excited already, Tsunade noted as she saw Naruto's length bulging in his boxers. Well, can you blame me? You're unbelievably beautiful, Naruto said, groaning slightly as he felt Tsunade's fingers graze his shaft. So you're a charmer as well, I see, Tsunade said, and to Naruto's surprise she leaned down and completely covered with her mouth and edged softly through the material. Tsunade, Naruto ed out. Tsunade smiled at Naruto. Even after all these years she still had it, carefully pulling the last piece of clothing off Naruto. Tsunade gasped slightly when she saw his size clearly. Shizune was so right. You are big for your age, Tsunade said as she grasped Naruto's 7-inch in her hand and gave it an experimental tug, forcing him to in pleasure. Starting off with a slow stroke, Tsunade cupped Naruto's balls in one hand while the other performed a twisting motion on his shaft. Oh, that feels good, Naruto ed in pleasure as the busty blonde gave him the best hand job he had ever experienced. Thank you, but you're about to feel even better, Tsunade setting the underside of Naruto's before assaulting the head of his with little kisses. Tsunade, your mouth is so good, Naruto ed again while clutching the sheets. Tsunade ed in agreement as she tasted Naruto's pre-cum on her lips. Getting tired of teasing Naruto and becoming impatient, Tsunade allowed the head into her mouth and rolled her tongue all around the underside of the head. Naruto in all his experience had never felt this good from oral. Granted, Shizune was better than those before her, but Tsunade completely destroyed Shizune when it came to oral. Naruto summarized as he felt Tsunade take his deeper into her mouth, allowing the head to kiss the back of her throat. For several seconds Tsunade kept Naruto's completely sheathed into her mouth and allowed her nose to graze his pubic hair, causing him to become cross-eyed at the pleasure he was feeling. Letting his slowly fall out of her mouth, Tsunade began to all around his, covering it in her saliva. I think I'm going to have a new reason to call you the legendary Naruto grinned as he watched the busty Sannin give him the best blow job he had ever had, and to his surprise Tsunade also grinned and lowered her head and gave one of Naruto's testicles a long before letting it out of her mouth with a popping noise. God, how do you make it feel so good? Naruto Ed watched Tsunade place a kiss to his scrotum before she looked up and give Naruto a smile. Remember, I'm a medic, it's only natural for me to know where the most sensitive parts are, and in this case, Tsunade said, her voice filled with lust, pleasurable places. She finished going back down to Naruto's balls and ing them while pumping his shaft vigorously. Oh god Tsunade, I'm going to cum. Naruto Ed out and lost any control he had when he felt Tsunade roll his balls around in her mouth. Quickly grabbing the shaft, Tsunade placed her lips over the head of Naruto's and let him fire his seed into her mouth. Naruto Ed let rope after rope of cum into Tsunade's mouth, in which she swallowed happily. After she was certain he had finished coming, Tsunade frowned slightly when she noticed his hadn't softened up. Ing the excess cum off the head, she let his manhood out of her mouth and gave it slow strokes. You're still hard? Tsunade asked, continuing the slow hand job. Yeah, I can't help it seeing you my balls like that. I don't think it's ever going to go down, Naruto muttered, relishing in the feeling of Tsunade's hand job. Is that so? You know, for the first time I think I'm grateful your mother isn't alive, because if she saw what I just did to you, let's just say I'd be dead. Tsunade grinning and getting off the bed and then pulled Naruto's bottom half of his body towards the edge of the bed the same way Shizune had. Naruto Ed his head to the side as he watched Tsunade stand up and slowly release the obi holding her kimono-style blouse up and let it drop to the floor, leaving her in only her blue bottoms. Naruto drooled slightly at the sight of Tsunade's perfectly sized ES and felt like coming the moment he saw them bounce. You like? Tsunade asked, kneeling between Naruto's legs and let him place his hands on her S. Yeah, they're amazing, you're so beautiful Tsunade, Naruto said, pinching her S, causing her to. While thank you for that, you're going to get a special treat, she said, placing her S around Naruto's and crushed them together. Slowly Tsunade began to move her S up and down Naruto's shaft and stuck her tongue out whenever she saw his purple helmet appear from her tits and it. Naruto Ed as he felt Tsunade give him a titty. This was definitively a first for him, and it wasn't long before Tsunade picked up the speed, destroying all of Naruto's will not to cum. I'm coming, Naruto cried out, releasing his seed again. Do it, cum all over my face and tits, Tsunade called out lustfully as she felt his warm cum land on her face, in her hair and all over her tits. Geez, you're going to end up killing me by the end of tonight, Naruto panted out as he looked towards Tsunade and seen herring his essence off her face. What a way to go though, right? Tsunade smiled. However, before she could say anything else, she gasped when she felt herself thrown onto the bed with a Naruto above her looking completely horny. You think you can get away with doing that to me? Think again, Naruto said, going straight for her neck and placed kisses all around it before moving up. Naruto slowly nibbled on her earlobe, making her in pleasure. Now reaching his hands out, Naruto also began to squeeze and massage Tsunade's enormous S. Feeling him massage her S, Tsunade Ed as he pinched and twisted her S. Naruto, she Ed again, feeling him kissing his way down her body. She was certain he would leave a hickey on his neck. Of course she would kill him later, but for now she couldn't care less about how many hickeys he left. You like? Naruto asked, kissing down the middle of her cleavage while squeezing her large and perfectly soft S. Oh, yeah, don't stop, Tsunade Ed as Naruto smirked. Tsunade Senju, the last of the famous Senju clan and one of the 3 legendary Sannin, was ing under him like a common whore. Despite the way she treated perverts here, she was asking him to continue to feel her up. Perhaps it was just publicly showing of perverts she hated, as so far she had shown him that when together she was the most perverted woman he had ever met, especially with what she was able to do with her body. Giving her left a squeeze, Naruto covered her right with his mouth and slowly circled her with his tongue, making her whimper slightly and pull on his spiky blonde hair. Naruto smiled as he heard Tsunade whimper. It seemed her S were the most sensitive parts on her body, smiling to himself at the information Naruto bit down on her. Tsunade's eyes widened when she felt Naruto's teeth clamp down on her and ed in pain, but she also found it surprising how pleasurable it was as well. Naruto, please stop teasing me, Tsunade whimpered as she tugged on Naruto's hair. Smiling, Naruto lifted his head from Tsunade's bosom and gave her on quick before kissing her toned stomach and moved down until her reached the beginning of Tsunade's pants. Are you wet? Naruto asked rhetorically as he traced a finger up her clothes and smiled when he felt her juices leaking out. I want to see how wet you are, Naruto stated as he began to peel away Tsunade's pants. His eyes widened however once he had discarded her blue pants. Wow, you're really wet, Naruto observed as he looked at Tsunade only in a pair of black panties that did nothing to cover her, but what turned Naruto on the most was they were soaked. Grinning, Naruto bent and gave her covered slit a long and slow, forcing her to arch her back in pleasure. Stop teasing me, Naruto, Tsunade growled while furiously tugging on Naruto's hair. Naruto grabbed the edge of Tsunade's black panties before sending a look to Tsunade telling her to lift her. Smiling when he saw Tsunade lift up, Naruto proceeded to pull down her panties and once he had them off threw them away. You're drenched, Naruto said as he stared at Tsunade's, slowly inserting a finger past her lips and began to slowly pump his finger into her. Shut up. Oh God, it's your fault, Tsunade ed in pleasure as she felt a man touch her for the first time in over 20 years. Oh, so you admit I drive you crazy, Naruto grinned as he added another finger and picked up the speed. Tsunade ed again with a heavy blush forming across her cheeks when she found herself unable to have anything to come back with. Naruto smiled when Tsunade wasn't able to come back with anything, stopping his pumping motion with his fingers and taking them out. Tsunade groaned in disappointment when she felt him stop fingering her, however she ed heavily and arched her back when she felt something tease her lips. Looking down with lust-filled eyes, she grinned when she saw Naruto rub circles around her with his tongue. So you're going to my Tsunade said seductively, however groaned in pleasure when she felt Naruto bite down on her. Yeah, I'm going to this sweet wet, Naruto mumbled as he stuck out his tongue into her and cupped her while lifting it up. Naruto proceeded Tsunade's dipping his tongue around the edges, sending waves of pleasure jolting around her body, sending her on the verge of an orgasm. Smiling as he saw Tsunade's body shake, Naruto could tell she was close to climaxing, and by the looks of things it was going to be a powerful one. Slowly Naruto moved his right hand and carefully entered a finger into Tsunade's, causing her eyes to widen in pleasure. Naruto, ooh! Tsunade shouted at the top of her lungs as her very core was shaken and reached her climax. Naruto smiled as he'd away all of Tsunade's orgasm. He found it surprising that she tasted so sweet, but he wasn't going to complain. He watched as Tsunade came down from her orgasm. Her skin was glistening in sweat, her breath was labored and her eyes were glazed over with pleasure. Moving his way back up her body, Naruto hovered over her and pressed his chest up to her, squashing them together as he looked at her as she seemed to be in some trance. That good, huh? Naruto grinned smugly as he watched Tsunade snap out of her trance and blush heavily. Shut up and kiss me, Tsunade commanded as she wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck and pulled him down into a passionate kiss. While kissing Tsunade, Naruto felt her hands move down his body and grip his hardened and give it soft caring strokes. Wordlessly, Tsunade lined Naruto into her and then placed her hands on his cheeks. Pulling away from the kiss, Tsunade leaned her forehead onto Naruto's and stared into his eyes. Me, Tsunade ordered, causing Naruto to chuckle as even now Tsunade was still so demanding. Well, anything for you, Naruto smirked, one that was mirrored by Tsunade before he pushed into her, separating her lips. Tsunade ed in pleasure as she felt Naruto's rub the inside of her walls as it sent waves of pleasure coursing throughout her. Eventually Naruto sheathed himself fully into her, his kissing the opening of her womb. They both stayed in that position for several seconds. For Tsunade, she closed her eyes in pain. She was trying to adjust to his size. Despite only being 14, he was bigger than Dan, that was for certain. while for Naruto he closed his eyes tightly, fighting back the urge to just spill his load right then. She was unbelievably tight. He couldn't blame her, though by the sounds of things this was most likely the first time she had in over 20 years. You can move, now, but don't go too fast, Tsunade ed out. Naruto nodded and slowly pulled out of Tsunade, rubbing her insides again and leaving only the head in before pushing into her again, forcing her back to arch in pleasure. Wrapping her arms around his shoulders, Tsunade stared at Naruto before leaning in for another kiss. Soon Naruto found his pace with Tsunade and began to repeatedly thrust into Tsunade as her eyes rolled into the back of her head every time his touched her womb. F faster Naruto, Tsunade ed out, meeting him thrust to thrust, causing his to hit deeper into Tsunade. Picking up the speed, Naruto flinched slightly as he felt Tsunade rake at his back. He could also feel his balls repeatedly slapping off Tsunade's, causing loud smacking noises to fill the room as their flesh collided. Oh god, it feels so good, Tsunade shouted. Naruto raised his eyebrows at Tsunade's shouting, however shrugged it off as he continued to slam into her. For a long period of time the only noises that could be heard from the room were grunts, the sound of skin meeting skin, and the squelching sound made when Naruto plunged into her. Tsunade, I'm close, Naruto grunted into her ear as he laid kisses all around her neck. Me too, Tsunade ed as she felt her climax coming again. Instinctively she wrapped her legs around Naruto's waist as he continued to pound her. I'm coming, Naruto grunted as he pushed as deep as he possibly could into Tsunade and released his seed into her waiting womb. Tsunade's eyes rolled into the back of her head as she heard Naruto, however the moment she felt his warm cum enter her womb it set off her own orgasm. Naruto ooh, Tsunade shouted, wrapping her arms around Naruto as tightly as she could while her gripped onto Naruto's like a vice and milked it for all its cum. As they laid there, Naruto looked down at Tsunade and he felt himself still buried into her and let off a small laugh. Wow Tsunade, you're as the best, Naruto mumbled as he kissed her neck again. I hope that's not all you've got, Naruto, Tsunade said while gripping Naruto's hair and placed kisses around Naruto's chin. Now how did I know you were going to say that? Naruto smiled as he slowly pulled his out of Tsunade and watched as some of his cum leaked out of her. Well, what can I say, I'm part Uzumaki, we are known for our stamina after all, Tsunade replied seductively while also staring at Naruto's cum. Wordlessly Naruto turned Tsunade over. He smiled as he felt no protest from the busty Sanin, letting her get comfortable so her was facing in the air and her head was buried in the pillow. Naruto grabbed his and slowly rubbed it across Tsunade's butt. Tsunade's eyes widened in fear and pleasure when she felt Naruto rub his across her anus. Naruto, what are you doing? Tsunade asked as she had never tried anal before and seeing how she was in her mid-40s she didn't really think she'd ever get the chance, however it seemed the blonde behind her wanted to take her second virginity. I was wondering if you wanted to try something new, Naruto said huskily, gently prodding her anus. Tsunade looked back slightly in concentration. Even though she loved Dan, she was a woman with needs and Naruto knew how to excite her. Even more than Dan, she had never been someone who would have multiple orgasms, and seeing as how Naruto had done nothing but pleasure her, she didn't see any harm in him taking her. Oh okay, just go slow, Tsunade whimpered. Naruto smiled and lined his up with Tsunade's anus. He was glad there were a lot of juices created between him and Tsunade as it made the perfect lube. Pushing himself in, he slowly felt the head pop in, closely followed by the rest of his shaft. I'm sorry, Naruto whispered as he leaned down and kissed Tsunade's neck. He could hear the whimpers she was letting out like a wounded animal, and for a woman like Tsunade to make them noises he could only imagine how painful it was. No. Please carry on, it actually feels good, Tsunade ed while Naruto smiled and placed his hand on her hips before slowly moving his hips backwards and launching them forward again. It's so big, Tsunade shouted, feeling Naruto burying himself into her. Naruto merely grunted before picking up the speed, which was closely followed by more shouting and ing. He also found it quite hypnotizing when his hips met hers and how her cheeks would shake. Also being new to anal, Naruto found himself coming to his climax quicker than normal, so leaning down and groping Tsunade's Naruto nibbled on Tsunade's ear. "I'm going to fill you up again," Naruto stated, causing her eyes to widen. "Yes, come in my I'm close too," Tsunade said while turning her head and captured Naruto into another passionate kiss. "Tsunade!" Naruto shouted, burying himself as deep as he could, and released his seed again, filling Tsunade to the brim. "Naruto!" Tsunade shouted, feeling Naruto's cum enter her again, set her off into another orgasm, and screamed happily as she felt him empty his balls into her. Once he had finished coming, Naruto pulled himself out and flopped down onto his back, panting heavily. Tsunade smiled and also laid next to him while throwing her arms and legs over him. "Wow, that felt amazing," Tsunade said before kissing Naruto slowly again while his cum leaked out of her hand. "I hope you're not done yet, Naruto. We have a long way to go before these are fully empty," Tsunade whispered while giving Naruto's balls a squeeze. "I'm ready when you are." Naruto grinned, one that was mirrored by Tsunade as she climbed on top of him and proceeded to give him the best night of his life so far. Tsunade's eyes fluttered open slightly as she felt the feeling of a light breeze cast over her body. Annoyingly opening her eyes, she looked over to Naruto's window and saw it was slightly open. Sighing as she looked down towards Naruto, she smiled a little as she saw his expression. He was laid on his back, allowing her to use his chest as a pillow and his body as a climbing frame. She had sprawled all over him, their legs were twisted together, her arms were around his waist, and her head rested neatly under his chin. Leaning forward, Tsunade placed a kiss on Naruto's forehead. She had remembered doing this for both Naoki and Dan. She felt he deserved it. After all, last night had been extremely pleasurable for her but exhausting. As both of them seemed to be in a competition on who could make the other cum the most, it had ended in a draw as they had both passed out. She was surprised he could last so long, as most men could only keep one orgasm, and it was rare to see a man who was able to actually get hard again. And after giving him multiple blow jobs last night that would have knocked out a normal man, she could definitively say he had a lot of stamina. Carefully prying herself off of him, Tsunade got off the bed, being careful in her movements to not wake the sleeping blonde. She flinched suddenly, however, as she felt her body bend. It was mostly her that stung though, and she didn't need to ask why, as she already knew. Naruto had taken her anal virginity and she wasn't going to regret it and complain about the stinging sensation. Well, until Naruto was awake, then she'd punish him. Walking over to the mirror in the room, Tsunade groaned as she saw her appearance. Her hair was a mess. Turning away and walking to the window completely in the as if she was the only one in the room, Tsunade shut the window fully and closed the curtains. "What are you doing up so early?" Naruto huskily whispered into her ear as he wrapped his arms around her waist and pressed himself onto her. She couldn't help but smile slightly. She too had wished she had stayed in bed, however Shizune would be looking for her soon. "Sorry, I have to go soon," Tsunade said, whiling as she felt Naruto press his manhood through her cheeks. She could feel herself blushing again and it quickly annoyed her. "Really? Well, that's a shame," Naruto whispered and bit Tsunade's earlobe playfully. Tsunade leaned into Naruto more and just enjoyed letting him touch her. Feeling a little dominated, Tsunade lowered her hand towards Naruto's and gave it a few soft strokes. "Come on, we're going," Tsunade commanded while walking towards the bathroom, all the while not letting go of Naruto's. "Where?" Naruto asked, enjoying her soft hands touching him. "The shower," Tsunade grinned, walking into the bathroom with Naruto. End of. An hour later, both Naruto and Tsunade walked out of the bathroom with giant grins on their faces. They quickly got dressed as Tsunade didn't want her apprentice to come looking for her in Naruto's room. As Tsunade was tying the obi back around her kimono-style blouse, she noticed Naruto staring at her intently. "What?" she asked, smiling seductively while turning around and now fully dressed. Nothing, I was just wondering something," Naruto said, blushing slightly as Tsunade continued to stare at him. "Well, what are you wondering about? I didn't think you would become so shy now, especially after everything we've done." Tsunade grinned, walking over to Naruto and pushed him down onto the bed and immediately straddled him. it was slightly awkward due to him only having his pants on and his chest was bare for Tsunade to see. I was just wondering if it was alright for me to come inside so much. I mean, isn't there a chance you'll get pregnant? Naruto stuttered while placing his hands on Tsunade's waist. Now you're wondering, after how much we did it last night, Tsunade started while smiling, and in the morning, Tsunade finished giving him a questioning look. Well, I don't usually come inside, you and Shizune are the only women I've ever done it to, Naruto said honestly with a panicked face as Tsunade never answered his question regarding there being a chance she could be pregnant. Don't worry, all kunoichi in their last year of the academy are taught an anti-pregnancy jutsu, Tsunade stated, while Naruto raised an eyebrow in confusion due to the fact he had never went to the academy in Konoha and was never informed by Jiraiya. But why? I mean, don't you graduate the academy at the age of 12 or something? Naruto asked, scrunching his face in confusion. Well, it's not that they use them straight away, it's for those kunoichis that reach Anbu level and have to go on missions that force them to use those jutsus, Tsunade said as she gave Naruto a quick kiss. Oh, you mean like seductive missions? Naruto said while Tsunade nodded. Well, that's good to know, at least I don't have to worry about knocking you up. Naruto grinned and leaned up to kiss Tsunade, to which she gladly accepted. Yeah, so don't worry about it next time, Tsunade stated while kissing his chest. Next time? Naruto questioned as he felt Tsunade's full lips on his chest kissing his toned abs. Don't take this wrongly, Naruto. This isn't love, we are two people that are attracted to one another physically, and the way I see it, you're lonely, I'm lonely, we might as well keep each other company with our bodies, right? Tsunade said while placing her head on Naruto's chest and sighed. Like friends with benefits? Naruto asked as he ran his hand through Tsunade's hair. Yeah, once every couple of months we could take time off for one night and just let loose and the next day part ways, Tsunade smirked as she saw Naruto grin slightly. What? Tsunade Senju asking me to become her buddy? Well, what straight man would say no to an offer like that? Naruto grinned as he felt Tsunade sit up, however he frowned in confusion once he saw Tsunade's worried face. What about Shizune? You're not planning on sleeping with her again, are you? Tsunade asked while Naruto raised his eyebrows as he suspected the hint of jealousy go through Tsunade's voice. No, she's too much of a nice person for that. She's only looking at a life of hurt as she tries to follow me. I'm not that special someone that will be able to love her completely. It isn't fair on her. She deserves to find true love, Naruto said seriously as he stood up and looked for his top. And you think I don't deserve to find my special someone? Tsunade asked with raised eyebrows. Are you looking? Naruto questioned her, frowning as he knew the answer. Touché. I think you're right. Shizune has spent a long time with me traveling. I want her to settle down, maybe even have a few kids, but she seems intent on following me, Tsunade said as she walked over towards Naruto's door while Naruto followed, as he had his top with him. Thank you for last night, Naruto. You made me feel a lot less lonelier than I have been in a long time, Tsunade stated as she leaned in and gave Naruto one more passionate lip lock before heading off and swayed her for Naruto as he watched her leave. Damn, that woman can be why when she wants to be, Naruto amused to himself before turning around and got fully dressed, strapping himself with his katana and pouches for his kunai, shurikens. That pervert better be back today, Naruto growled in frustration as he placed a large scroll on his back and walked out of the room. While walking through the streets, Naruto couldn't help but snort at the number of people complaining about their heads. If they hadn't have got so drunk last night, then they wouldn't be like that. It was their own damn fault. As he walked into the bar he had been coming into for the last couple of days, he smiled at the sight of Shizune and Tsunade talking together. Naruto-kun, Shizune gasped, standing up and waved towards him, motioning him to sit next to them, to which Naruto happily complied. Hey Shizune, did you have a good night last night? Naruto asked as he sat next to Tsunade, who was surprisingly drinking herbal tea. Ah, yes, I managed to make it back to the room all right, but what about you, Naruto-kun? You seemed so sad, Shizune said, giving him a knowing look since she had talked to him before they had about his troubles slightly. I told you, Shizune, it's nothing, festivals aren't for everyone, besides look at him now, he looks a lot more happier, obviously something made him feel better, Tsunade said while sipping her tea while her hand moved onto Naruto's thigh. Naruto's eyes widened as he felt Tsunade move her hand closer and closer to his crotch. He let out a small gasp when he felt Tsunade give him a squeeze, causing him to harden slightly. I had a good sleep last night, that's all, Naruto stuttered out, biting back as Tsunade gently caressed him through his pants. Well, if it isn't my excellent apprentice and the beautiful Shizune-chan and Tsunade Haim, a voice screamed, making Tsunade stop touching Naruto and look to the door of the bar. Jiraiya stood there happily with his hands on his hips, his usual smile on his face. However, on his face there was a small cut on his cheek. Sensei, you're back, where the hell have you been? Naruto stood up and pointed towards his teacher. Ah, my apprentice, it seems like you took my advice and lost the hood. I told you no one would recognize you around here, and for where I've been, let's just say I've been doing a lot of research. You mean to tell me you were peeking on women while I had to watch over Naruto? Tsunade growled at him and stood up. Naruto raised his eyebrows slightly and forced back a snort. She made it seem like a complaint, however she wasn't complaining when she was bouncing on him like a pogo stick, oring his like a lollipop. Well, I am grateful, and if it means anything, I was just getting Naruto so we can get out of your hair, Jiraiya pouted while Naruto sighed at his sensei's behavior. Already? Well, I guess this is goodbye for now, Naruto. Remember, I want to see you every couple of months for those checkups, Tsunade said, giving him a wink when Jiraiya wasn't looking. Yeah, I'll be sure to come, Naruto said with a smile and walked out of the bar. Hey Naruto, wait, Jiraiya said, trying to catch up to Naruto. Tsunade smiled at the scene before turning to sit back down with Shizune. Tsunade-sama, how do you expect to meet up with Naruto-kun when you didn't tell him where you would be? Shizune asked in confusion. Don't worry, I'm sure our paths will cross again, Tsunade stated, taking another sip of her tea before scratching her left cheek. Bastard, leaving a Hiraishin marker on my, how cruel, this thing itches like, I'm going to get that bastard back if it's the last thing I do, Tsunade thought angrily at the thought of the blonde. Meanwhile, as Jiraiya was walking next to him, Naruto couldn't help but scowl. The man had brushed his questions off like he was a child. However, he gave him the benefit of the doubt because Tsunade was there and he wouldn't want to upset the Sannin, but now he was still quiet. So, Sensei, where were you all this time? Naruto asked as both he and Jiraiya looked at the gates of the small village. I went to the place Orochimaru was apparently spotted, but it was a dead end. Though he did lay a few surprise traps for me, Jiraiya laughed as he pointed towards his cheek. Naruto immediately frowned. There was no way that it took that long to enter a base and get out, and as they passed the gate, Naruto waited a couple more minutes before conversing with Jiraiya again. Was that all? You were away far longer than I expected, Naruto said while looking at his sensei through the corner of his eyes. No, Jiraiya sighed as all humor was gone in his voice. Naruto was sure he could pick up the sound of sadness and regret in his voice. Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly, as the only time he had ever heard his sensei like this was when he talked about either Minato or Nimato. I went to Konoha to see Nimato, Jiraiya said in sadness. Oh, how is he? Naruto asked, his voice also turning into a tone of sadness. He's safe, Jiraiya muttered while Naruto narrowed his eyes again at Jiraiya as he heard the pause. You didn't answer my question, Sensei, Naruto said through gritted teeth, while Jiraiya sighed. He's safe like I said, but he's lonely, Jiraiya said sorrowfully, while Naruto stayed quiet pondering his thoughts. Anyway, Sensei, I've been thinking I'm going to head into Kurigakure. There's something I need to find out, Naruto said, causing Jiraiya to frown. Are you sure? Before we parted you told me you wanted to stay out of Kurigakure due to the civil war. What's changed? Jiraiya asked with raised eyebrows. Personal reasons, Naruto said simply as he stopped walking. Jiraiya sighed as he also stopped walking. Of course he should have known that Naruto wouldn't tell him. Ever since he met him he'd always kept the heavy burdens on himself. Okay, there's no stopping you anyway, Just promise me you'll be careful, Jiraiya said seriously while looking at Naruto. It was amazing the growth that he had seen in him. In height he was a couple of inches shorter than him without his giant elevated sandals on. Yeah, I promise I'll see you around, sensei, Naruto said waving as he took off towards Kurigakure. I'm sorry Kushina, Minato, your sons are going through so much and I can't help either of them, Jiraiya whispered as he stared at Naruto's retreating form. Naruto raced through the trees. He figured he's try catch the boat that went to Kurigakure at the edge of Kumogakure. He knew it'd be at least one more day before he reached Kurigakure. After a couple of hours of non-stop running, Naruto emerged out of the forest and jumped towards the docks. He saw. Seeing a man that was next to a large ship, Naruto walked over to him. Hello, I was wondering if you would be able to take me to Kurigakure. You would be paid for it as well, obviously, Naruto stated to the man in an emotionless tone. The man snarled at him. To a civilian it would have scared the crap out of them, but knowing he could easily kill the man if he had to, Naruto held his ground. You mad boy, there hasn't been a ship sailed into Kurigakure in over 4 months. Every ship that's gone in the last couple of years have never came back. Keep your money and we'll keep our lives, the man said while Naruto frowned slightly and nodded before walking off down the docks to see if anyone else would be willing. Heard you were looking for a ship, a feminine voice stated, forcing Naruto to turn around and look at the women who called to him. Yeah, you willing to go to Kurigakure though? Naruto asked as he raised his eyebrows at the women. She was extremely attractive. She had a dark toned skin color, yellow eyes, light blue hair which was spiked out, and wore a red vest with blue shorts and looked to be in her mid-30s. I'm not like those pussies. If you're willing to pay, I'm willing to take you, she said raising her hand. Thank you. The name's Naruto, Naruto said shaking her hand. Sufu, nice to meet you, the now known Sufu said. So, where's your ship? Naruto asked as he looked around and couldn't see any large ship that she would use. You can't see her, look over there, Sufu said pointing towards the docks. Naruto's eyes widened however when he saw where she was pointing, as in front of him was a small boat that looked like it was falling apart. The one mast it had was cracked straight down the middle. She needs a few repairs, but I just haven't had the time to fix her up, Sufu said rubbing the back of her head in embarrassment. It will be fine, Naruto muttered as he followed Sufu to the boat, and as he walked onto it he noticed it had a cabin below. You ready? She asked, untying the rope that was attached to a wooden pole as she saw Naruto nod. Naruto stayed quiet for most of the time on the boat. He was a little frustrated that the boat wouldn't make its way to Kurigakure until the morning, as he was getting impatient to find some answers. As he sat at a small table in the cabin below, the room was only lit by a small candle in the center of the table. Looking around, Naruto was surprised by what he saw. On the wall he could see pictures hung up. The first one he saw was Sufu standing next to her boat. The boat was a lot cleaner and less cracked. The giant smile on her face showed Naruto that her boat was her pride and joy. The second picture was Sufu and a man he expected to be her husband, especially if the matching rings on their fingers were anything to go by. Also in the middle of them was a small boy with short spiky, dark-toned skin and light blue hair with green eyes. That's my son Shuaha, he's 13 now, Sufu said with a little sadness in her voice. Oh, he looks a lot like you, Naruto commented as he noticed her smile at the comment. Thank you, he's a mama's boy as well, she said sitting down on the opposite side of the table. Must be hard for him then, knowing that his mother might never come back one day, Naruto said holding her gaze, as her coal-like eyes seemed to turn into a golden pool of emotions. It's something he and his father have adjusted to. Before the war in Kurigakure I was a supply convoy, it was good money, however since the war started I haven't been able to get into Kurigakure without the fear of losing my life and leaving my husband and son, Sufu confessed with a sad tone. It was only now Naruto could see the effects the war in Kurigakure was doing to other countries, to good people who were being affected. You've done a great job with what you've got. Not everybody could say they would be able to smile with what they have been given. That's something you should be proud of, Naruto said, giving her a small smile. Thank you, Sufu said again, blushing slightly as she was complimented by Naruto. It was strange how even though he was a teenager he spoke with the mind of an older person. I wouldn't worry. I promise things will become better for you. I'm going to head off to bed, is that okay? Naruto asked, standing up and looked towards Sufu. Yes, no problem, thank you again Naruto-kun. Sufu blushed as she realized she had referred to him with a suffix. Naruto smiled and nodded before walking to a door a few meters away and opened it. He was surprised to find a small single bed but shrugged it off and started to undress. As he got all his clothes off except his boxer shorts, he heard the sound of someone opening his door. He sighed in relief when he saw the familiar blue hair of Sufu. Oh, Sufu, can I help you? Naruto asked as he watched her walk into the room and shift around nervously. Ah, no Naruto-kun, I came to see if you were settling in all right, she said, blushing as she saw Naruto's chest. It's fine, you have offered me so much already, Naruto said while he watched Sufu get closer. The candle-lit room made her skin look bronze in color. You know Naruto-kun, you've helped me a lot today, you've given me the confidence to keep fighting. I've been thinking that you're right, as long as I am able to smile for my family I believe I will be able to carry on, Sufu said while smiling and placing her hand on Naruto's bare shoulders and letting her long fingernails roam down his chest and roam over his stomach. Warning. Naruto raised his eyebrow in confusion as he felt Sufu trace his muscles with her fingers. She stopped at the top of his boxer shorts and tugged on them. Sufu, what are you doing? Naruto asked in confusion. Sufu was a married woman and a mother. She wasn't thinking of doing that, was she? I'm sorry Naruto-kun, it's been a while since I've felt this horny and I can't suppress it. Please just relax and let me take care of you, she said, lovingly pushing Naruto onto his back so he was laying down on the single bed. Pulling down his shorts, Sufu smiled when she saw his flaccid and carefully grasped it getting out of Naruto. She immediately lowered her head and let his past her lips and with her tongue peeled back the foreskin and lightly ed on it. Ah, Sufu, Naruto ed in pleasure. While she wasn't as good as Tsunade, she was certainly talented in her own right. Sufu rolled her tongue around the head of his and while it was still in her mouth looked straight into Naruto's eyes and never broke contact while she proceeded to the head. You like me giving you head? She asked, letting his fall from her lips leaving a trail of pre-cum still attached. Unable to say anything, Naruto nodded before she went back down and placed loving kisses hands around the expanding shaft. Naruto groaned as he felt her lower her head even more. She quickly captured one of his balls in her mouth and ate it while letting it roll around in her mouth. You taste delicious Naruto-kun, she said as she trailed her way back up at his and onto the head, getting underside of the head while her hands playfully massaged his balls. For a numerous amount of time the only sounds that could be heard were slurping sounds as Sufu continued to give Naruto a blow job. However, she could tell he was close to coming by the way he would thrust his hips up, sending his further into her mouth until it smacked the back of her throat. Also the constant twitching of his was also another sign. Sufu, I'm coming, Naruto said as he took a hold of his and jacked him off in front of her face. Seconds later white ropes landed in her hair, on her face and in her mouth, covering her face completely in cum. Wow, you certainly cum a lot, Sufu said amusingly as she scooped up a large trail of cum that had landed on her nose, filling her smell with his essence before she swallowed it. Yeah, I know, but was that really alright for you to do that? You're married, Naruto said, feeling guilty. No, I feel bad too, but my body wants it so badly. Please Naruto-kun, just for tonight make me yours, Sufu said, gripping a hold of Naruto's and started to slowly stroke him. Alright, Naruto muttered as watched her hand move up and down his, causing him to harden again. We're going to my room though, my bed's bigger so we'll be able to do a lot more, Sufu reasoned as she stood up and walked out of the room, never letting go of Naruto's. Why do women always walk with mai in their hand? Naruto thought as he walked into Sufu's room. End of. The next day Naruto woke up feeling a lot better. The sounds of seagulls flying past a small window in the room caught his attention. However, as he tried to move his legs he felt another pair entangled with his. Suddenly his senses came back and he felt another body on his. Looking down, he saw the dark-toned skin of Sufu as her head laid peacefully on his chest. As if she noticed him staring, Sufu opened her eyes tiredly and her eyes widened as she realized she was on Naruto's chest. However, after several seconds her memories of the night before came back, how she had gone into Naruto's quarters and ed him off, how she had done it again multiple times when they made it into her room, and how he had taken her in every position she could think of before passing out. "Good morning," she whispered, trailing her finger along Naruto's chest. "Morning," Naruto replied, trailing his hand up and down her spine, and sighed as he felt her tighten her embrace around him. "I'm surprised. I've never passed out before, after," she said, looking up at him, and he smiled at her compliment. "Well, I'm just that good, aren't I?" Naruto stated, and they both shared a chuckle before she kissed his chest. Before he could tighten his embrace with her, his eyes widened before narrowing and sighing. "We've arrived," Naruto stated. "How do you know?" she asked while still placing kisses all around his chest. "My clone just dispersed. We are right next to land," Naruto stated and smiled slightly as she pouted before rolling off and standing up, allowing him to see her body and firm ass. Well, it wasn't like he hadn't saw it already. "So there goes morning," she muttered out angrily. "Sorry," Naruto said as stood up and placed a kiss to her shoulder. "It's not your fault," Sufu said as she turned around and let her bounce for Naruto to see as she looked for her clothes. Naruto also went into his room and picked up his clothing and equipment before getting dressed and walked into the main compartment of the cabin. "So, one wild night, huh?" Sufu said as she sat down fully dressed. However, Naruto could still see a hickey he had left on the right side of her neck. "You know, I should feel ashamed. I've just been ed by someone who is young enough to be my son, yet I feel happy about it," she said as she stretched her neck. "Oh, so it was my young cum you liked," Naruto said with a teasing grin, one that was copied by her. "Yeah, but I was wondering why you never came in me. I wouldn't have stopped you, you know," she said. It was true, Naruto never came inside her. He always made sure to pull out and give her a facial or cum on the small of her back and the insides of her thighs all the way up to her chest. "I didn't want to risk the chance of knocking you up. You'd have some explaining to do with your husband otherwise," Naruto said with a shrug. "I see, I'll have to tell him anyway about what happened. I owe it to him. I love him, but I let my body take over control," she said, slightly worried at the thought of telling her husband she had let another man take her. "I'm sure he'll forgive you, eventually," Naruto said as he stood up and began to ascend to the top of the boat. "I hope," Sufu said as she looked at the photo of her husband and son. "Thank you for everything, Sufu. Even last night I'll always remember it," Naruto said, going into his scroll and releasing a large pouch. "Me too. Who knows, if my husband doesn't take me back, we could have an encore of last night's performance. I've certainly acquired a taste for you," she said teasingly as she wondered what was in the pouch Naruto had. "Here, take this as a thank you," Naruto said, taking a hold of Sufu's hands and dropped the pouch into her hands. Ignoring the blush on her face, Sufu looked into the pouch and her eyes widened as inside was a large sum of money, enough most likely to buy a few houses. "Why, you didn't have to, Naruto-kun," she said, trembling at Naruto's kindness. "And you didn't have to take me here, but you did. Thank you," Naruto said once more and placed a kiss to her forehead. "Well, until we meet again," Naruto motioned as he walked off the boat. "Yeah, come back again sometime. I'd be happy to make you dinner at the house," she said, waving as she slowly set off. As he watched her go, Naruto's eyes narrowed before turning around and looked into the sky and the thick heavy mist. "The bloody mist, huh?" he said before pulling up his hood and walking into the forest. Naruto scanned his eyes around the area in front of him. The forest was almost completely dead. The leaves on the trees had completely fallen off, leaving the trees bare. The mist surrounding them was thick and made it almost impossible to see. There was very little wildlife. The only animals he had seen were birds and wolves, but now as he stood in a giant crater where the trees had been blown away, Naruto sighed at the thought of where he was. The bloody mist, the only place that had a genin exam involving fighting your classmates, friends in a battle to the death. He had no doubt that the rumors were true. Just by standing here in the forests outside of Kurigakure no Sato he could feel the death in the air, the constant feeling of being watched. The sound of an explosion caused Naruto to turn his head towards the source. Deciding that he didn't have enough information in what was happening, Naruto carefully rushed towards the explosion in hopes to gain some answers. When he got to where the sound of the explosion, Naruto's eyes narrowed as in front of him was another crater. However, in the middle of it was a burnt body. The smell forced Naruto to pull up the face mask that was attached to his cloak so he didn't have to smell the burning flesh. The body was completely burnt. He could tell by the shape of the body it was a woman. However, all of the hair had been burnt off. Bones could be seen from where the skin had melted and her body was burnt black. His eyes watched carefully as the birds he had seen earlier landed on the body and began to scavenge whatever skin they could. Naruto's eyes flickered to the left where he saw a pack of 3 wolves approach the body and scared the birds off. Having seen enough, Naruto noticed multiple footprints leading away from the scene. He quickly jumped towards the way they were leading. He quickly caught sight of another explosion. This time he was able to see it through the trees. Landing on a branch not too far away, he caught the sight of a man and a woman in cloaks holding onto each other, as next to them was a crater exactly like the ones he had seen before with another burnt body. Above them in a tree were 3 people, each of them wearing masks. He had seen only Hunter Nin use. "Why are you doing this to us?" The woman cried out, the panic in her voice clearly shown. "You are monsters, you should know why we are doing this," one of the Hunter Nin said, unsheathing his sword. "We understand what you think, but to hunt us down like sport, it's inhuman," the man said angrily as he tried to hide the woman behind him. "Inhuman? You call us inhuman, you bloodline freaks," the same Hunter Nin said in anger and dashed towards the pair and went to slice off the man's head. However, a wooden pillar emerged from the earth and intercepted the blade. What the hell?" the Hunter Nin shouted as he tried to pull his blade out of the wooden pillar. Running through the trees, Naruto went through hand seals and looked over at the other 2 Hunter Nins. "Futon. Kazakiri no Jutsu," Naruto whispered. The Hunter Nins turned around when they heard something coming towards them. Their eyes widened, however, when they felt a pain in their stomach and gasped as soon as they saw blood explode from one another. Naruto rushed past their bodies as they fell to the floor dead. He unsheathed his katana and chopped off the arm of the last Hunter Nin, forcing him to drop his sword. The Hunter Nin screamed out in pain as blood spurted out of his arm. What the hell who are you?" the Hunter Nin shouted, jumping back trying to stop the blood flowing out of his arm and failing miserably as a pool of blood soon formed under him. Naruto studied the Hunter Nin carefully. He could tell that the man would soon pass out from the amount of blood loss. "Shit. Why did I have to get involved? I should have just carried on moving, but these people were defenseless, they would have been slaughtered," Naruto thought while planning his next step. "Hey, I asked you a question," the Hunter Nin shouted again while Naruto took a glance at the 2 cloaked people next to him. They were shivering and whispering to each other. "Who is your leader?" Naruto asked emotionlessly. "What? Yagura-sama is, and he'll be pissed once he finds out that someone stopped us from exterminating those bloodline freaks," the Hunter Nin said again. His legs were now starting to shake from the blood loss. "Thank you," Naruto said, running towards the man and striking downwards, ending the man's life in shower of blood. Sighing and sheathing his sword, Naruto turned around and walked towards the cloaked couple. He saw them tense up and frowned. "I'm not going to hurt you. If I wanted you dead, I would have killed you already," Naruto stated as he stopped in front of them. The smaller cloaked individual stepped forward slightly and pulled their hood down, revealing elderly women. Her hair was gray and tied into a bun, and her face was wrinkled, making her look around 60. "Shurui, don't, he could be tricking us," the cloaked man said while placing his hand on the now identified Shurui. "Kibo, this man isn't going to hurt us. Like he said, if he wanted us dead, he could have already killed us. Also, he's got a bloodline limit too," Shurui said, turning towards the man and smiled once she saw him pull down his hood as well, showing a bald man who looked around the same age as Shurui. "Thank you for saving us, Shinobi-san. If it wasn't for you, we would have been killed," Shurui said and bowed slightly while Kibo closed his eyes and nodded his head. "It's no problem. What they were doing is inhumane. Any decent human being would have done the same, Naruto said, but became confused when he saw the old man scoff. Decent human? What are you talking about, boy? Kibo said, while Shurui placed her hand on his shoulder. Kibo, calm down, she started, then looked towards Naruto. You're not from around here, are you? No, this is the first time I've actually been in Kurigakure, Naruto stated. See, Kibo, the boy doesn't know what's happening, but first, you didn't happen to see my daughter pass you, did you? We split ways trying to confuse those hunter nins, Shurui said calmly as she looked at Naruto. Naruto thought for a few seconds and remembered the women he saw lying on the ground, burnt and dead. I'm sorry they got her, Naruto said solemnly as he looked at the old couple. Damn, those bastards, Kibo said, falling to his knees and punching the ground. Kibo, Shurui said, draping herself over Kibo, and cried over the loss of her daughter. Naruto looked on sadly as the old couple mourned the death of their family members. We lost her, Shurui, our daughter, Kibo cried. No, we need to get to Mei, she will know what to do, Shurui also cried, helping her husband up. Young man, would you help us back to our camp? We'll inform you on the way there, but we must hurry, more hunter nin will come, Shurui pleaded. Of course, Naruto nodded and watched as Kibo pulled himself together slightly. Follow me, he said, and took a hold of his wife's hand and ran further into the forest. Naruto sighed before following them, keeping at their pace. So, why were those hunter nins trying to kill you? Naruto asked as he rushed forward. Yes, I suppose you deserve some explanations. It goes back quite a few years ago. When Yagura went mad with power, he called for the immediate extermination of the bloodline users. It's rumored he feared one of us rising up and taking his spot as Mizukage. He's slowly turned most of Kurigakure against us through fear, and ever since then anyone with a bloodline has been hunted and killed, Shurui said as she sighed. This Yagura, does he care that you are suffering? Naruto asked. No, that bastard doesn't give a. I hope someone kills that little shit. He's more of a monster than anyone, Kibo said angrily, clenching his fist. Naruto nodded as he continued rushing through the trees with the old couple, not knowing what Kibo meant. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he noticed another chakra signature. Both Kibo and Shurui stopped and started to feel around the different trees. Ah, here it is, Shurui said as she pushed a button on the tree. A few seconds later, Naruto heard the sound of rustling. Who's there? A voice said while Naruto frowned as he understood what was happening. A genjutsu, it's clever but it's also risky, Naruto thought as he watched Kibo and Shurui remove their hoods. Ah, Shurui-sama, Kibo-sama, my apologies, a man said, appearing out of thin air. He had brown spiky hair, black top and bottoms with a gray chest plate. Kai, he said, releasing the genjutsu. Naruto's eye widened as he saw a village out of nowhere appear. There was small wooden cabins all the way up to large wooden cabins all lined up. He followed both Kibo and Shurui into the village. Stop. Who are you? The same man asked as he grabbed Naruto's shoulder, stopping him from walking, and quickly Naruto put his hand on the hilt of his katana. Stop, Hogosha-chan, he's with us, he's here to help, Shurui said. Naruto contemplated telling her that it wasn't his goal to stop a war and help them, but seeing as it caused the man to back off, he said nothing. Don't worry about him, he's very cautious. He's from a special clan of genjutsu users. There aren't many left, but they help keep this small camp safe, Shurui said as they walked through the little village. Naruto felt a little uneasy as he walked. He could see people staring at him in fear, awe and wonder. He noticed the kids were walking around in rags far too big for them. The adults were also wearing rags that had holes in them in multiple places. He noticed the ninjas were walking around paranoid, grasping their weapons as a lifeline. All in all, he could see fear. He noticed that they had made their way to a large circular wooden building. He stopped and waited as Kibo walked over towards the door and knocked. Immediately, a large man with a giant sword opened the door. After a few whispered words, he motioned for Naruto to follow him and Shurui. After a few staircases, they stopped at a wooden door again. Kibo knocked again. Come in, a soft feminine voice spoke. However, he could still hear the weariness that was in it. Kibo opened the door and the three of them walked through. Naruto immediately noticed the room was well kept. As he got further in, he noticed a desk with someone sat at it. Oba-san, Oji-san, I'm so glad you're safe, the woman said, standing up. Naruto gasped lightly as he watched her stand up. She was a slender woman. She looked like she was in her late 20s. She had green eyes and ankle-length auburn hair styled into a herringbone pattern at the back. A top knot was tied up at the top with blue band and 4 bangs in front. 2 of the bangs were short, with one covering her left eye and 2 others crossed between her chest just under her chin. She was wearing a long-sleeved dark blue dress that fell just below her knees. It seemed to close at the front with a zip and is kept on and is kept open on the front right side from the waist down. The dress only covered the upper part of her arms and the underside of her s. Underneath, she wore mesh armor that covered more of her upper body than her dress. Around her waist was white belt that had pouches hanging from the back. She was also wearing blue high-heeled sandals and shin guards reaching up to her knees. On her fingers and toes there was dark blue polish and dark blue lipstick on her lips. All in all, Naruto would say she was very attractive, rivaling that of Tsunade. Mei-chan, Shurui whispered, her voice taking a sad tone. Immediately the now identified Mei's smile fell into a straight line and frown appeared on her face. Where are the others? Mei asked, and as if on cue Shurui rushed forward and sobbed onto Mei, telling her everything from how they were chased to the death of her daughter and meeting Naruto. Naruto watched carefully as Mei consoled Shurui, making sure to keep her emotions in check while soothing her carefully, making sure she was comfortable. The action itself made Naruto sad as he remembered his own parents' death and that no one was around to help him like this. He watched Kibo out of the corner of his eyes. The man stood there like a stone, his eyes hardening. After 30 minutes, Shurui's cries turned into light breathing, signaling she had fallen to sleep. Kibo walked towards the 2 women and smiled ever so slightly as Mei placed her hand on his shoulder and whispered something to him. Naruto watched as he carried Shurui out of the room. Before looking back towards Mei, he could see she was tired. She rubbed her forehead and slumped over on the chair before looking at Naruto, her green emerald eye locking onto his azures. I know you saved my grandparents' life, but could you please remove your hood? It would put me at ease to see the face of who I'm talking to, Mei asked seriously. Naruto thought for a second before shrugging. It's understandable. I'm assuming you're the leader of this rebel army and you can't take risks when it comes to new people, Naruto stated before taking off his hood and showing his facial features. Mei blushed slightly as she saw Naruto's face and hair, the spiky blonde hair and 2 large bangs which fell just beneath his chin framing his face. The blue azure eyes of his made her feel like she was looking into the sea. If she was being honest, she would have to say Naruto was the best looking man she had ever seen. She could also tell he was quite young despite being as tall as her. I would also like your name, Mei said, gathering her senses and fought back the blush. Naruto, he said with a straight face as he watched Mei. Well, Naruto, I'd like to thank you for saving my grandparents. You'll have to forgive their behavior. Usually they are cheerful, however, as you know, they have just lost their daughter and my auntie, Mei said, giving Naruto a small smile. It's no problem, the death of someone close is never easy, Naruto said, fighting back memories. How old are you, Naruto, if you don't mind me asking? Mei said calmly. 14, Naruto answered while Mei's eyes widened slightly. So young, yet so mature, why is that? Mei asked. Personal reasons, Naruto stated while closing his eyes. Fair enough, maybe one day I'll earn your trust for you to tell me. However, my grandmother also said that this was your first time in Kurigakure. For what reasons have you come for? Mei asked, narrowing her eyes ever so slightly. I am not certain yet. I was told to come here as there were answers I was looking for, Naruto stated while frowning. I see, it's rare to see someone that is able to take out 3 hunter nins, and it's also rare to see someone with the Mukten ability. Perhaps you should stay with us, and help us in this war. Who knows, you may find your answers in doing so, Mei said. However, Naruto could also hear the desperation in her voice. He knew the moment she had heard about his abilities she would try to recruit him, and by the looks of things they were desperate. However, he also knew in participating in this war he would eventually have to reveal himself, as soon he would have monikers, and with his similar appearances to his father, word would spread around fast that the oldest son of the Yondaime was still alive. Aye, Naruto stuttered as watched as Mei's face turned into one of disappointment, as if almost knowing what he was going to say. It's really something, isn't it, that no matter how painful our lives are, there will always be those who are the complete opposite and are always happy. Kind of makes you a little jealous, doesn't it? Naruto's eyes widened slightly as Tsunade's voice pierced his head. I wouldn't worry, I promise things will become better for you. Naruto's face scrunched up into a frown as he remembered his conversation with Sufu, how he had promised that things would look up for her and it seemed he would have to sacrifice something. Okay, I'll do it, but only if you promise that no one over than you will have the authority to order me around, Naruto said as he came to a conclusion. Yes, eventually the world would hear of his accomplishments, and of course Konoha would have to mark him as a missing nin despite never officially being a part of the system. However, due to his family ties he would be marked a criminal, but perhaps this was for the best. He was sick of hiding. He was strong enough now to be able to protect his village, yet the Hokage hadn't sent for him or gave him the clear that it was safe. Thank you so much. Of course you will be one of my new personal guards. I don't know why, but I trust you, Mei said with a smile. That's acceptable. However, as we're alone, there is something I have to tell you. I ask you to please keep this a secret between me and you for now, as it will leak out eventually, Naruto said with a straight face as he stared at Mei and took a breath once he saw her nod. My full name is Naruto Namikaze. I am the son of the Yondaime Hokage. However, my reasons for not being Konoha no Sato are personal, so please don't ask, Naruto said as he looked at Mei, whose eyes widened in shock. Coughing slightly to get her attention, Naruto shifted uncomfortably. I see, that's some secret you have. It just means I can trust you even more, right? Now that I know anyway, and seeing as you're helping me, I'll help you, Naruto. Your secret is safe with me, Mei Terumi, future Godime Mizukage, Mei pronounced proudly. Thank you, Mei, Naruto stated honestly. It's nothing really, Naruto. You should get comfortable in here. I've asked my grandfather to arrange your living arrangements, so go see him after this, Mei offered, walking towards Naruto. I'm glad to have you on our side, Naruto, Mei said, offering her hand. It's no trouble, Naruto said with a smile before taking her hand and shaking on it, signaling a friendship that would last a lifetime, hopefully. Naruto quickly pulled his hood up as he left the building. He knew that eventually his identity would be revealed, yet he still wanted to hide it for now. As he walked down the streets, he frowned at the living conditions this put-together village was hanging on by a thread. The morale was down and everyone looked about ready to give up. Locating the cabin Mei had gave him directions to, Naruto knocked on the door and waited several seconds before the sound of footsteps could be heard through the wooden floorboards. Kibo opened the door and stared at Naruto for a couple of seconds. Oh, it's you. Come in, but take that damn hood down, Kibo said, walking back into the cabin, motioning for Naruto to follow him, while Naruto stood there gaping as he had just been scolded for wearing a hood. Complying quickly, Naruto walked into the cabin and pulled down his hood and followed Kibo back into the main seating area of the cabin. So, young and handsome, Naruto turned his head to see Shurui sat on a chair with a herbal tea in her hand, and she was staring at Naruto in shock. Ah, this is the first time you've seen with me without my hood, isn't it? Naruto said while scratching the back of his head. Yes, it is. I'm surprised you're so young, but other than that, what is your name, boy? It only fair you tell us since you know ours, Kibo asked roughly as crossed his arms in the doorway. I never told you. Oh well, my name's Naruto, Naruto said before he remembered what Mei had told him. I was also told to come here for my living arrangements, Naruto said while looking at Kibo. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper and a key and walked over towards Naruto and handed them to him. This is the key to your cabin and these are the directions. Mei obviously trusts you enough to keep you around. It would be wise not to break her trust, Kibo said while Naruto frowned at the man's words. Kibo, behave. You're always welcome to drop by, Naruto-chan, Shurui said kindly as Naruto nodded and walked out of the cabin and back into the streets. Eventually Naruto made it to where his cabin was. It wasn't small and it wasn't large either. He did hope that he would be living by himself as he had seen several people sharing cabins. Putting the key into the keyhole, Naruto unlocked the door and proceeded to walk in. The natural light coming in from the window made it possible to see everything. He could see 3 doors from his position. Walking over towards the closest one to him, Naruto smiled slightly when he saw a small desk and chair with a candle next to it. It was obviously a study room and Naruto briefly wondered if everyone had one. Closing the door, Naruto made his way over towards another door and opened it. Inside was a small bathtub, toilet and sink. Closing the bathroom door, Naruto walked over towards the final door and opened it and sighed as soon as he saw the bed. It was single, but Naruto couldn't have been happier. At least he wouldn't have to sleep on the floor. Taking one more last look around, Naruto noticed that he didn't have a seating area like Shurui and Kibo, but he wasn't going to complain since he wasn't really expecting anyone to come round. Walking over towards his new bed, Naruto unstrapped his katana and scroll and placed them next to his bed before falling onto it and drifting off into a dreamless sleep. The rain poured down heavily, bouncing off every surface it impacted with. There was no sign of anyone around except for one small boy in a bright orange top and bottoms. His spiky blonde hair was flattened down due to the rain, and in front of his eyes were a pair of goggles covering his eyes from the rain. However, if one were to look closely, they would be able to see that there was water inside them. He sat on a lonesome swing under one tree that was doing nothing to give him protection from the rain. In front of him was the Konoha Ninja Academy building. "Why do I always fail?" the boy muttered, his blue eyes glancing around full of pain. "Why does everyone hate me?" he said again and got no answer, and after a couple of seconds buried his face into his hands and cried. Naruto quickly sat up from his bed, sweat pouring down the side of his face. He could briefly hear the sound of knocking at his door. Another nightmare, Naruto thought, and put on a pair of black Anbu bottoms before heading towards the door and greet whoever was there. "Naruto-san, sorry to wake you, but Mai-sama has asked for you," a young girl said. She had blonde hair and green eyes. Naruto noticed that she had a Kurigakure headband on and tilted his head. She seemed to be around 9 or 10 years old. "Okay, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Naruto said, closing the door as the girl nodded her head and ran towards the main building known as headquarters. Going back into his room, Naruto quickly got himself dressed and readied his equipment before heading out. He could tell it was still early in the morning as there was only shinobi around. As he made his way to the main building, Naruto saw the little girl from earlier rush past him with a smile. So carefree, even in these times, Naruto thought, knocking on the door of the headquarters. Immediately the same man from yesterday with the giant sword appeared and glanced at Naruto. "You must be Naruto. Mai-sama is waiting." Naruto nodded and walked past the man. Naruto knocked on the door and frowned when he heard multiple voices coming from inside, and from the sound of things it was pretty heated. "Come on in, Naruto." Naruto opened the door. As he heard Mei's voice, he noticed there was a large oval table with several people around it, with Mei being at the top. "So this is the newcomer. How can you be so foolish and let anyone into the rebellion? Mei, he could be here to betray us," an elderly woman said, sneering at Naruto, with several other older members nodding their heads while Naruto thought the urge to punch each of them. "We don't really have many options. The way we are now, we'll be destroyed in the next year, all of us. We have roughly 2,000 shinobi who are fit to actually fight. Yagura has 5,000 plus. And you expect us to just sit here hoping that things will just get better? The fact is, we need Naruto more than he needs us," Mei shouted. Naruto was taken back slightly at her raised voice. He stood next to a few other shinobi in the room as he watched the scene. "We are losing more and more shinobi each day. I can personally vouch for Naruto, so stop complaining as we have more important matters to get onto," Mei said as she calmed her voice while a few of the elderly members bowed their head at Mei's authority. Yesterday, 3 hunter nins were extremely close to finding the camp. If it wasn't for Naruto, I'm afraid they would have. I believe Yagura will soon know where we are. We have to act fast. Reports from yesterday have showed me that Yagura is setting up a large camp 6 kilometers away from here. I believe he's going to try take us out in one sweep," Mei stopped as she looked at the shocked expressions everyone was showing except Naruto. What should we do? An elderly man said in fear, while Mei sighed. The only thing we can do meet them head on and hopefully try to scare them off for now, make them rethink strategies, Mei summed up while looking at a map in front of her. We will take a 500 shinobis to meet them head on. I myself will be leading this group, Mei said while everyone but Naruto gasped. But Mei-sama, that's suicide, you'll be outnumbered, send someone else to lead, a middle-aged man said standing up while Mei just glared at him. How you will be leading another 1,000 to attack from the side, make sure you do it at the most suitable time to give us an advantage, otherwise it will be for nothing, Mei commanded. Yes, Mei-sama. How said Naruto looked at the man with narrowed eyes. He was a middle-aged man with moosed-up blue hair. He wore a gray turtleneck jumped with gray bottoms and a turquoise-color robe over him. However, what Naruto noticed was the eye patch over his right eye. He had only ever seen one shinobi do that, and that was Kakashi, so he could hide his Sharingan and so it didn't drain him of his chakra. I want to leave another 500 shinobis here just in case things don't go as planned. Hogosha, I want you to lead here while I'm gone and make sure nothing happens, Mei said looking towards another shinobi who Naruto easily recognized as the guy from yesterday who disabled the genjutsu. Why yes, Mei-sama, Hogosha stuttered while blushing, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow. Seems like someone's got a little crush, Naruto thought in amusement. But Mei-sama, if Ao-san and Hogosha-san are not going with you into battle, who will protect you? An elderly man asked. I am a cage-level shinobi, I do not need protecting, however I will be taking Naruto with me, he will be watching my back, Mei said, causing people to mutter. Are you sure that's wise? He's only a boy and he might not be that strong. Naruto could feel his eyebrow twitching as he heard that and felt like unsheathing his katana and showing them who the boy really is. Naruto may be young but he's incredibly powerful, possibly even stronger than me. I trust he'll keep me safe in battle, Mei said seriously while looking at Naruto as if sending him a secret message. Naruto understood straight away Mei was talking about the answers he needed and knew if he wanted them he'd have to help them. Everyone looked at Naruto in amazement and Hogosha looked at him in anger and jealousy. I take the silence means you have no more questions. Already everyone, we live in the next hour. Dismissed, Mei said standing up while the counselors left. Mei-sama, is it wise to have the newcomer protect you? Hogosha said while Naruto raised an eyebrow at the desperation he could hear in his voice. Yes, now go to the gate and prepare our departure, Mei demanded as Hogosha nodded and left quickly and sent a sly glare to Naruto as he walked past. Next, Ao walked up to Naruto and stared at him for a few seconds. His one uncovered eye stared at Naruto in concentration. You've been giving an important job, and if Mei-sama trusts you then so will I, Ao said placing his hand on Naruto's shoulder and left with the other shinobis, leaving only Naruto and Mei alone. I'm sorry for the way everyone's treating you, Naruto. There's only a few people who actually believe you are here to help, Mei said quietly, giving Naruto an apologetic look, hoping her people hadn't driven off someone of Naruto's caliber. It's fine, everyone is paranoid, it's understandable, Naruto said quietly while still being angry at people calling him a child. He had over things to think about. Thank you. Come, let's meet up with everyone, Naruto nodded as he followed Mei out of the room. Naruto stood behind Mei as she stood in front of 500 shinobi. She nodded to Hogosha as he opened the gate. Naruto could see the fear in every one of the shinobi's eyes. He couldn't blame them, most of them would probably die after today. They're scared, Mei said as Naruto looked back at her and could see the same traces of fear in Mei's eyes. I know, Naruto said quietly as he remembered the third shinobi war. He had seen the same fear in his parents' eyes. But we'll be alright, after all we have you leading us. Naruto smiled at Mei and saw her blush slightly in embarrassment. Nodding her head, she carried on walking with new determination in her eyes, knowing she had people who believed in her. After a couple hours of traveling, Mei signaled everyone to stop and get down. The shinobis hid in the trees while Mei called for Naruto. What do you think? Mei asked as Naruto landed next to her. Naruto looked in front of him. He could see the ending of the forest, and in an open field there were close to 300 shinobis walking around. It's a trap, Naruto stated as he narrowed his eyes at the scene in front of him. It was clear that this was part of Yagura's army as he could see the Kurigakure head protector. That's what I thought as well, Mei whispered in frustration while planning her next move. What are you going to do? Naruto asked as he watched Mei concentrate. Get everyone with a fire and wind element at the front quickly, Mei ordered, and Naruto nodded while rushing back to do as she ordered. Once the fire and wind users were at the front, Mei went through hand signals informing them of the plan. Now, Mei shouted while going through hand signs like the rest of the fire users. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu, the fire users shouted, and multiple giant fire balls flew out of the forest, surprising the shinobi in the middle of the field. And just as the fireball were about to reach the shinobis, Mei shouted again. Wind users now. Naruto went through hand seals along with a few others and jumped in front of the fire users. Futon. Daitapa. Naruto pushed his hands forward with the rest of the wind users and watched as a large gust of wind appeared and enlarged the fireballs, completely engulfing the 300 shinobis in fire, making them scream out in pain. As soon as the fire died down, the only thing that could be seen was the burnt land, which had now been scorched black. Move forward everyone, Mei commanded again while Naruto looked at her in slight confusion. We'll be playing right into their trap, Naruto whispered so no one else could hear. I know, but they're not going to come out any other way, especially now they've seen what we can do, Mei said, walking forwards onto the burnt ground. Mei-sama, I'm sensing over 600 chakra signatures, someone shouted, and Naruto quickly identified him as a sensor. That's nothing to worry about, it's only 100 more than us, Mei said calmly while the sensor paled. But Yagura is leading them, the same sensor said while Naruto frowned as he watched Mei pale slightly. Are you sure? She demanded through gritted teeth. Yes, there's no mistaking his Biju's chakra, the sensor said, shaking in fear, while Naruto's eyes widened. He's a Jinchuriki? Naruto asked Mei as she nodded. Yes, he's the container of the Isobu, it's the reason he's so strong. My techniques have no effect on him at all. He's completely synced with his Biju, Mei said angrily as Yagura appeared on the other side of the field. Naruto narrowed his eyes at Yagura. He looked no older than he did. He had gray hair with a few spikes, pink eyes, and a scar that ran down his from the bottom of his right eye to his chin. A Jinchuriki? He's like Minato. Could Minato turn out like him? Naruto thought as he watched Yagura order half of his forces forward. Let's meet them, we just have to hold out long enough until our arrives with the rest, Mei said as she raised her arm up and quickly launched it down, signaling everyone to battle, and immediately all 500 shinobis ran forward while Mei and Naruto stayed behind. Why are we staying back? Shouldn't we help them? Naruto questioned as he looked at Mei, who was concentrating fully on the battle. No, Yagura's plan is to weaken our forces. You and I are cage-level shinobi, we will win this first round, but Yagura will send the rest of his forces to wipe us out, and unfortunately we will have to keep our eyes on Yagura. His attacks are deadly, one hit is all it takes, Mei said, tightening her knuckles. Naruto looked onto the battlefield. It was true the 500 rebel shinobis were slowly defeating Yagura's forces, however they were also taking heavy losses. Naruto could see many of the rebel shinobis dying. Eventually Mei's forces won out, however they were easily reduced to less than half while half of Yagura's shinobi were laying on the floor dead. Looking over towards the Jinchuriki, Naruto frowned when he saw him smiling and lifting his hand up and quickly dropping it. Where's Ao? Mei said angrily as she watched the rest of Yagura's shinobi advance on what was left of her forces and meet them in battle. Let me go in, Naruto said, and Mei snapped her head towards Naruto in shock. Alone? She asked, while Naruto nodded. Yes, I'll be able to take out the rest. Also, you don't have shinobi to spare. If what you said about the numbers Yagura has under his control, then we haven't even taken out 1/5 of his army while he's defeated 1/4 of yours, Naruto reasoned, glaring at Yagura under his hood. I'll go with you then, Mei said, causing Naruto to shake his head at her stubbornness. No, I must go alone. If you are captured or killed, it's over for everyone. Trust me, I'll win, Naruto said, sending her a smile. Fine, but you better come back or I'll kill you myself. I still have to get to know you properly, Mei said after some thought while Naruto shook his head in amusement at Mei. Alright, time to let loose, Naruto said, walking out of the tree line and into the field just as the rest of the rebel forces were being slaughtered. Naruto calmly walked forward as he noticed everyone turn their eyes on him and slowly unsheathed his katana and flicked it downwards. He watched as Yagura nodded and smiled to his forces and they cheered before charging at Naruto. Naruto roughly estimated there to be around 150 shinobi left. He could tell they were clumsy by the way they held their weapons, they were unorganized. Crouching down, Naruto channeled chakra to his feet and propelled forward, destroying the ground below where his feet traveled, surprising the shinobi, and sliced his way through a line of them and ended up behind the group, ignoring the shower of blood behind him. Standing up fully, Naruto took a glance at Yagura and saw his expression was still calm, though the guards next to him were looking at the battlefield in awe. Naruto turned around and flicked his sword, cleaning the blood off it before getting into the same crouched position and propelled forward. He was surprised as he felt a few of the shinobi reflect his attack. It seemed there was more to the Kurigakure shinobi than he first thought. Naruto sighed as he sheathed his katana. It seemed that they weren't going to fall for the same trick twice. Going through hand seals, Naruto quickly slapped his hands onto the ground. Immediately hundreds of wooden spikes erupted from the ground, impaling most of the shinobis, showering the battlefield in blood. The ones who were lucky enough to escape backed away as fast as they could.